All right. All right. So what I'm gonna start with is we're going to be talking about the books that you're going to need for the business. All right. We're just going to do an overview of the business books for starters. All right. So if you're going to be a Florida contractor, you're going to have to take the business portion of the exam. All right. Um, and the manuals that you're going to need are the Builder's Guide to Accounting. All right, this is one of the manuals that you're going to need.
Yes, I got it.
The other manuals that you're going to need are your AIA documents. Now they tell you that these have to be in a binder, and when you take your exam, they do. So I've got mine in a binder. All
Mm-hmm.
right, and here they are. They are the AIA 201 and the 401 and the AIA 701. All right.
Okay.
So those are the three manuals that you're going to have. We're going to talk about these in more detail in just a minute. And then you have the Florida Contractors Manual. Now, the one that I'm holding up is the 2021, and that's okay if you have the 2017. All right. So we'll talk a lot about the Florida Contractors Manual as well. So that's really we talk about these as being three books when actually the AIA documents themselves are three, but we talk about three. And what I suggest is that especially if you're taking the residential or the builder or the general contractor, and we really like it with all the exams, is you do the business first. Okay. And the reason we do that is because, as you may know, you may have a dozen books that you are responsible for knowing, all right, for your whole exam. But for the
Yes.
business and finance, we just have these three. Okay. And then once we master these and we pass the business exam, then we're still going to use these more than likely, especially on the residential builder and general contractor, and then even some on the other trade exams as well. So overall, we generally like to do the business first. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the manuals. Just knowing about the manuals helps you understand and where to go, because it's all about finding the information. These exams are not designed for you to learn individual pieces of information and regurgitate them. That is not the way they're designed. They're designed to test your ability to know where to find stuff in the books and be able to go find them. Okay, so that's really the key. And so understanding the nature of these manuals is going to be very important for you. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about these AIA documents. All right. You may or may not have ever seen these AIA documents before. And if you've never seen them before, that's fine. Probably most contractors that I come into, probably the majority, don't understand what the AIA is all about. Okay. And that's fine. And when I took my first class in 2005, I didn't know either. All right. But I was able to get a pretty solid, score on the exam, and enjoyed the class so much that I decided I would start teaching people to do this. Okay,
That's nice.
so let's talk about these AIA documents. Okay, these are actually contracts. Okay, these are contracts. These are contracts that are developed by the American Institute of Architects. Okay, so I want you to think about it. This first one is the general conditions for the contract of construction. Okay, so I want you to think about, this is the 201. I want you to think about a construction job, a big one, maybe building a condominium or building, a big commercial job or something like that. As you might imagine, the contract is there can be hundreds of issues with regard to your contract. Maybe who's going to be responsible for, the underground utility location. Maybe how are you going to get paid? Who are you going to ask for your money? How soon do you have to ask for your money? How often are you going to ask for your money? Once you ask for your money, how long are they going to have to either approve that, yeah, you're due the money, or deny you? And then once you are approved for payment, when are you going to get paid? What are all these time frames involved? Okay. What if you find something, you're digging, you're excavating, and you find something that was not in the contract document? Something, unforeseen, what they call unforeseen conditions. Well, what do you have to do? Who do you have to notify? All right. So, and that's just touches the surface just a little bit of all the hundreds of things that can come up in a construction job. So think about this. If you had a different contract with every single job that you did and there was nothing standardized, you would have to carefully read every single line of that contract. It could be 50 pages, and you would have to carefully read every single line just to make sure that you weren't unaware of something that was going to come up. Well, with the AIA documents, what's nice about those is that you know exactly what that AIA document says because you've done it before or you come to this class, but if you're doing an AIA job, you don't, and you do several of them, and this is the way you do business is with AIA contracts, is you understand. Everybody knows what's expected, okay, when you're going to get paid. How do you apply for payment? And how many days do they have to tell you, yeah, you're good, you're going to get your money, and then you get your money. Okay. And just like I said, what about a change order? What goes into a change order? What are they expecting with a change order? What if you don't agree on a change order? There's something called a construction change directive. You got to do it anyway. All right. And then there's a process that they come up with for what the construction, what the amount's going to be and what have you. So there's all these different things. So that's all about the 20. That's what this 20. That's what all the AI documents are really. But the 201 especially is is the actual contract, the general conditions for the contract for construction. So just take a look at it for a minute. The first thing I'd like to do is I like to see that if a book has an index. Okay, so this is the table of contents when you open it up, and it's called actually table of articles is what they call it. So it's a real good thing to understand all these different articles and what they are. So you have the general provisions, which is kind of stuff like who owns the documents, the architects own the documents and so on and so forth. Then you have the owner. Okay, so you have this number 2 is the owner, number 3 is the contractor, number 4 is the architect. What this whole thing is about is this relationship between these three people. What the owner's responsibilities and rights are, what the architect's responsibilities and rights are, and what the contractor's owners and rights and responsibilities are. Okay, and what happens, and all these different things, and their relationship between one another. Okay, and how they notify things. You're going to notify them in writing. You got to notify them within so many days. The contractor is going to lose his insurance. He's got to notify the architect and the owner within so many days that something's going on with his insurance. Just all sorts of stuff that's in the AI 201, but it's about the relationship between the owner, the contractor, and the architect. Okay, and their contractual relationship. Now, architect. This is whenever I hear the term architect, I'm going to think the AIA 201 because I can't think of a place anywhere else in any of these manuals where they talk about an architect. So if I hear architect, automatically, okay, that must probably the 201. Okay, the architect's responsibilities, what the architect's duties are, what the architect's powers are, and everything else. Okay, and then you've got the owner of the project. Now, owner, it could be in this. The contractor, of course, is going to be all over the place, and there's going to be stuff about contractors in all the different manuals. But there will be some responsibilities they have here as well. Okay, and if you look down these articles, you'll see subcontractors. I'm going to skip number 6, 7 changes in the work. That's your change orders. Okay. The time, number 8. What are your time frames? Number 9. This is a big one. Payments. Okay, and completion. Number 10. Protections of your people and property. Who's responsible for this type of stuff? Insurance. Okay, uncovering and correcting work. So I'm going to go over the rest of them right now, but this gives you an idea. This is a contract, and this is what you have to do under those certain circumstances. All right. So the reason I'm telling you this is because, for one reason, is when you get that test question, it's going to read like, okay, somebody's got to do something here. This is a responsibility. This is a time frame. There's a lot of time frames here. The owner is responsible to do this. The contractor is responsible to do this. The architect is responsible to do this. And there's a lot of time frames. Okay, so that is the type of a question. It's gonna be very specific. about what somebody has to do. Much of the other information in the other manuals is more general. Okay, more general information about what contractors do and how a contract has to be licensed and all this other stuff. But if the question reads like it's a time frame or a very specific thing that one of these people, the architect, the owner, or the contractor has to do, there's a good chance it's going to be in the AIA 201. Okay, we're not going to go page by page on this. That's going to be for a future video. But for now, this is an overview. The other thing I want you to know is there's a good index. Okay, this is the only AIA document that has an index. So you get, the 201. Yes, the 201. And it's the biggest one. It's the longest one. So it does need an index, really. The other two are smaller and they don't necessarily need an index. Okay. So I encourage you to use this. Okay. And this is when you're taking this exam, if you don't know this already, then I'll tell you, you use the indexes. The indexes are the most, and the correct word is indices, but a lot of people don't understand, that indexes is easier to understand. So you use the indexes, you watch, you read the question, you get the general idea, you get the key word, the key phrase, the general concept, then you go to the index, and then it's going to take you to the page. All right. If you get really, really good at these books and really, really know them good, well, then, then you can navigate the books without the index. But more than likely, 99% of the people use the index. That's going to be the key. And this one has an index. Now the 401 and the 701. Well, let's just do it for example. Let's say you get a question about your building permit. Who's responsible to get the building permit? Well, you look in the index, you look under B, it says building permit 3.7.1. We go to 3.7.1. And what does it say? 3.7.1, unless otherwise, permits, fees, notices. Unless otherwise provided in the contract documents, the contractor shall secure and pay for the building permit. There you go. So if you get the question about the building permit, you go to the index, building permit, boom, contractor pays for the building permit. And that's how you use this document. All right. So the other documents that are important are the other AIA documents that you have to be familiar with, need to be, is the 401. Now, what is the 401 about? Well, this is the standard form of agreement between the contractor and the subcontractor. Once again, think about this. Think about all the issues that can come up between a contractor and a subcontractor. For instance, the subcontractor's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Well, what do? How do you notify him? Well, you better notify him in writing, right? You better give him so many days. And that's what this, to correct the work. And if he doesn't correct the work, then you got to find somebody else to do the work, right? Well, all these things, all these time frames, all these number of days, all this, the method of notifying the subcontractor, all these things are specified in this document. Okay, this is the relation. So when you get a question where it talks about the relationship between the contractor and the subcontractor, and where it's specific about, especially how many number of days you have to do something, there's a real good chance it's going to be in the AIA 401. Now, that is not 100%. That's going to be most of the time. There is other information about subcontractors elsewhere in the manuals. Okay, the Florida Contractors Manual has a chapter 10 where they talk about subcontracts. They talk about your subcontractor and the responsibilities and so forth. But for the most part, whenever I see the term subcontractor on an exam, I'm thinking 401 first, unless it's very general. If it's specific about what the contractor's responsibilities are with regard to the subcontractor or vice versa, then you're going to be thinking AIA 401. Okay, so that's the 401. That one, by the way, does not have an index. So you're going to want to look at the table of articles. Okay, once again, you got your table of articles here, and it says your subcontract, the documents, the mutual rights and responsibilities, and then it's got the contractor, the subcontractor, once again, changes in the work. Number 7, or 6 is claims and disputes. 7, termination, suspension, assignment of the subcontract. So it should 11 is a real important one. Payments. 12, insurance and bonds. So this gives you a good rundown of exactly how this is organized. And this is going to be very important because there is no index for you to help you out. Okay.
Yes.
And once again, we're going to go later detail page by page on these AIA documents. Okay. But for now, we're just getting an overview, which many times is all you're going to need anyway, but it's always good to get more details.
All right.
Okay. The last one is the AIA 701. So we have the AIA 701, and it is instructions to bidders. Okay, so whenever I see the term bidder on an exam, BIDDER, I think AIA 701. Now that's not 100% because they do have bidding and estimating in the contractor's manual, but especially when it comes to a specific time frame or a specific duty of the bidder, all right, then you're going to think 701. All right, what kind of things does the bidder have to do? Well, there's some examples. Say the bidder has to put down a deposit in order to get the contract documents. Well, the bidding documents, they call them. Well, once you return the bidding documents, you have X number of days to get your deposit back. Well, that's just kind of silly kind of stuff they put in here that you may have to, know on an exam. Or let's say that the bidder wants some clarification, okay, on one of the bidding documents. Well, there's a time frame involved where the contractor has to request the information from the architect so many days before the date that the bids are due. Okay, because you got to give the contractor some time. You can't wait till 45 minutes before the bidding documents are due, and you say, "Oh, by the way, can you explain this?" I need some clarification. Or another issue is, let's say the contractor wants to substitute something in the bidding documents. So I want to use this material. Can I use this material instead of another material? Well, you have a time frame involved where you have to ask for that. You have to submit that, they call it, so many days before the date of the receipt of the bids. And then what they're going to tell you as well as, okay, you can use this material, but guess who's responsible if it doesn't work? And it's going to be you, the contractor, whoever proposes that. All right, and these are the kind of details that are in the 701. On the AIA documents, the key is specificity. If it's a time frame involved, especially, and it's member AIA, owner, contractor, architect. 40, that's the 201.
201,
yeah. 401, contractor, subcontractor. 701, instructions to bidders. Okay. And another thing is they may tell you according to the AI documents, and you don't have to worry about where to find it. Okay. So you'll know. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I did a breakdown one time when I took the general contractors exam. Okay, so you take the business exam and then you go take the contract administration. Okay, that's the next exam. Generally people take the contract administration if they're taking the builder, residential, or general. And the name of the exam is contract administration, right? Well, guess what? It's all about contracts. There was more AIA document questions on that general contractor's contract administration exam than there was on of any other manual. Okay, so we think of the contract administration and the project management, and I'm talking builder, residential, and general now. We think that of those second two tests as being trade tests, but they really have a lot of business stuff on them too. So that's one reason why, yeah, especially for your builder, your residential, and your general, we want you to do the business first because there's a lot of bleed over once you get to your trade exam. Okay, so you got to know that. All right, very good. So that's your AIA documents. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Builder's Guide to Accounting. All right, this is the Builder's Guide to Accounting. All right. You do not have to be an expert accountant to pass this exam. Okay, all you got to be able to do is look up information. So you're going to read a question, all right? You're going to find the keyword and you're going to go to the index. Well, how do you know what's going to be in the Builder's Guide to Accounting? Well, we all know what accounting terms are, right? ledger, balance sheet, income statement, checkbook, accruals, inventory, all these terms that we've heard all our lives and tried to avoid because that's really not what we want to do. We want to build stuff, right? But we've heard it, people in the people in the office talk about payroll and all this kind of stuff that you have to know a little something about. Well, to pass the exam, you got to be able to find it in the book on test day. So if there is a question that has an accounting term in it, seems like it's going to be an accounting question, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to go to the Builder's Guide to Accounting. Now, there's no guarantee it's going to be in here, but unless you know it's somewhere else in the Contractor's Manual, because you're not going to get accounting questions in the AIA documents, okay, based on my explanation of those. But there is these accounting questions could be in the Contractor's Manual, and I'll explain that in a minute. But for the most part, your accounting questions are going to come out of your Builder's Guide to Accounting. Once again, it's got a really good index. You get a question with an accounting term in. The first thing you want to do is you want to go to the index of the Builder's Guide to Accounting, and then you'll hopefully you'll find it. All right. If you don't find it in the Builder's Guide to Accounting, then you're going to go to the Florida Contractors Manual. Now, the Florida Contractors Manual has Chapter 3 in it. If you look at Chapter 3, it does say financial management. Okay, so there is going to be a lot of accounting information in financial management. There's a lot of terms, there's a lot of concepts that could be in both books. But the Florida Contractors Manual does have stuff that's not in the Builder's Guide to Accounting and vice versa. Okay, so it is going to be challenging. This is one of those things where you have to realize you're going to look in this Builder's Guide to Accounting for this question. That's when that alarm's got to go off in your head where you say, okay, I've spent too much time looking at the Builder's Guide to Accounting. Let me go to the Contractor's Manual and find it. And the good news is the Contractor's Manual does have a good index as well. Okay. Now, speaking of the index in the Contractor's Manual, there's been a lot of activity with the Florida Contractors Manual. Okay, there's a lot to go over just to talk about the manual itself without going into the actual chapters and the information. Okay, let me tell you what I'm talking about. First of all, you got, if you have a 2017 edition of the Florida Contractors Manual, that's great. Okay, so we're in 2022 now. They do have a 2021 book out, but if you've got a 2017, that's fine. 2017, they did a great job with, editing in it. It's got an index in it. When I took the exam back in 2005, they didn't have an index in this book. And let me tell you, that was a bear trying to find information in this book without an index. Okay, so the 2017 book, it's got the index. Now, there's a couple of things that have changed. Okay, but it's very few. And so I would feel very comfortable somebody using the 2017 Contractor's Manual to pass, to use as your reference manual. And as we go through the very few things that have changed, as we go into detail, chapter by chapter, I will point those out to you. Okay, that's another video there. This is an overview. Okay, so that's the 2017 book. Now, when you get to the 2021 book, it gets a little more complicated because there has been two different versions put out. The first version that they put out did not have an index in it. So what you have to do, and this is very important, is you have to make sure you have this index, and you have to make sure it's in a binder when you go to take the exam, because if it's not in a binder, if anything is not in a binder, they won't let you take it in possible. Okay, this goes for your AIA documents and everything else that you're bringing in. It's got to be bound.
Can I take books in?
Yes, you're going to be taking these books in. This is an open book test. Okay, so you're taking all these books in. All right, so this is my index. It's been printed out, and if you do not have it, it is very important. You need to call the wherever you got your books. You need to get a table of contents. Now, if your book has a table of contents, if you have a 2021 contractor's manual and it has a table of contents, then that's great. That was the second. That was the second edition, and it'll have a table of contents, and you can you can rest assured that that table of contents is good. Now, there has been an issue with that book, though. There are some pages that are missing out of that book. And what those pages are, and I can show you those real quick because my book does have them. It's in the back of it's in the very back of chapter 3 in what they call the Circular E. You have these things called wage tables, all right? And this is the tables that you use to figure out what somebody's federal income taxes are based on their marital status, how many dependents they're claiming, and how often they get paid. Those are the three criteria they use as far as what table you're going to use. Now, the bad news is those pages are missing. The good news is what they've decided is they will not be asking any questions about federal income taxes and how much in using these tables on the next several exams, I guess several years exams, as long as they're using that 2021 book. And to be honest with you, when I took my exam back in 2021, I remember them having payroll questions on there where you had to figure out what somebody's federal income taxes are. I've been talking with people over the past couple of years and they haven't been asking those anyway. So you don't have to do payroll. Now, do you have to do math? Yeah, you got to do some math, especially on on all of it. Especially the business and finance, you got to know. I've got a series of videos on just the math questions. I take you through every single one of these math questions and try to explain very carefully, step by step, how you do them. It's not the way you do it in the real world, so you really do need to have somebody walk you through how you do that. Okay, and I'll give you just for instance on the math. On this Builder's Guide to Accounting, okay, there is something called percentage of completion. The way they think that you're supposed to bill is you bill according to what percent of the job that you have complete. They call that percentage of completion. Well, how do you know how complete you are? Well, according to on test day, the way you have to do it is they tell you what your costs to date are, what you've spent so far. It's all about cost. It's what you've spent so far, okay, and what you're going to spend, what they call the estimated remaining cost to complete. And if what I always tell people to do is when you get a percentage of completion question, you go to page 24. At the bottom right on page 24, there is a formula. It tells you you take the cost to date, what you spent so far, and you divide it by the cost to date plus your estimated remaining cost to complete, which is another way to say your total costs. And you do the math, you divide your your cost to date divided by your total cost, and you will get your percent complete. It'll be a decimal, and you'll have to move the decimal point over twice. If that sounds kind of complicated, don't worry about it because there's a video that's going to take you all the way through that, and you'll be fine. Okay, just got to pay attention. Always go to page 24 when you get a percentage of completion problem, unless you really are good at memorizing these formulas. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a sideline. Now, we didn't finish talking about this Florida Contractors manual. Okay, so what I'd like to do is so let's just recap before we go in the Florida Contractors manual. We talked about what the Aia Documents are, 201, 401, 701. We talked about the Builder's Guide to Accounting, and you're going to use that book first when you get an accounting question. You're going to use chapter 3 here, the Florida Contractors Manual, if you can't find it in the Builder's Guide to Accounting, if it is an accounting question. Everything else is going to be in the Florida Contractors Manual. And I can tell you, the first time I took the exam back in 2005, I've walked out because this is when you had to do it all. You did it all in 2 days. You did the business and finance on Tuesday, then you did the contract administration, the project management on Wednesday. Now, this is for your builder residential in general I'm talking about. But this also, as far as the business and finance can apply to everybody. But I remember thinking if there was one book that I could take into this exam, this would be the book. Okay, because this is where they're getting a majority of the questions on the business and finance exam. And then when you get to the trade portion of residential builder and general contractor. If you're doing a sub trade like a roofer or a swimming pool or an underground or air conditioning, then not so much. The only thing you're going to use is chapter 7, which is about safety, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more. I want to go chapter by chapter and kind of explain what's in this manual. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk. I want you to go to the table of contents, and it'll say contents at a glance. So we're just gonna look down this list, these contents. Not really going to do too much specifics in the book itself, but once again, this is just an overview of what's in the book. There's going to be videos for each particular chapter later on. All right, so chapter 1, business planning and organization. Okay, this is primarily, how you're going to get set up. Okay, and somebody explained it to me. I actually had a student tell me this one time, and it had not occurred to me that this book sort of starts at the beginning of when you start your business, and it kind of takes you all the way through the process until you're actually on the job site working, all the things you have to do. Because you start by planning your business, then you get your license, and then you got some financial management, and then you got to get some insurance, and it kind of takes you through the whole process that way. It's kind of interesting. I never really thought that until I had a student tell me not long ago about that. But anyway, so chapter 1 is about business planning and organization. So are you going to work as a sole proprietor? Are you going to work as a corporation? Are you going to be an S corp? All right. What is a joint venture? What is a partnership? What are the advantages of being a corporation versus being a sole proprietor? What are the downsides of being a sole proprietor? Did you know that if you're a sole proprietor, okay, that if something should go wrong, you could get sued and your personal assets are at risk? Okay. That's why in construction, even if you work as a lone wolf, you're generally an S corp or an LLC. Okay. Because if you manage that LLC or S corp correctly, then you shield yourself for the most part, in an ideal world, you shield yourself from liability personally. Okay, so that's why people in construction are generally not sole proprietors. Okay, so anyway, we're setting up our business, we're getting startup capital, where we've got all these forms we have to fill out when we're getting started. That's what chapter 1 is about. All right, and as you can tell, this is different than anything we've talked about before. Okay, it's not accounting. It's not contracts. Okay, the second chapter is licensing. Okay, licensing is probably, if I could pick one chapter that they're going to hit it harder than any others, it could be licensing. Okay, so this is all about getting your license. How do you qualify to get a license? And you got to take an exam, and you got to be 18 years of age, and you got to prove your experience, and so on and so forth. And all that is in your licensing right there. What you can do to get in trouble with your license, what you can, your continuing education, how you keep your license. Every 2 years you got to do education. So there's all these things about licensing. Now, licensing is in chapter 2. Now, I want to talk about a different type of a chapter. They have something called chapter 489. Now, the reason they call it chapter 489 is because it is a Florida statute, chapter 489. It's a law. This is the law that sets forth construction contracting. Okay, so anything about the licensing part of contracting. So when we talk, so what will happen is we'll talk about chapter 489. Now, chapter 489. What happens in these chapters? Some of these chapters, the way that they are organized, is that first of all, it's usually an attorney that has put together each chapter. It's a different attorney or group of attorneys for each chapter. For chapter 2, what the attorney has done is he has gone and examined chapter 489. Okay, done this all his life. This is his business. He knows chapter 489, and he's taken all the important parts out of chapter 489 and summarized them. So what I call the first part of the chapter is the summary, where this attorney has summarized all of the things that he thinks is or she thinks is important. Now, and then they also list the whole law in the book, the word for word law, chapter 489. Okay. So one reason it's important to know that is because there are certain things in the summary that this attorney has summarized for us that he didn't mention. Okay, he didn't think it was important enough to mention. So you might not find it in the summary. You may have to go in the word for word chapter 489 document. Okay, and so I want you to be aware of that. And just while we're at it, if you go to if you're in the 2017 book, it's on page 2-62. If you're in the 2021 book, it's on page 2-58. And this is the beginning of chapter 489, the word for word chapter 489. Okay, and you can kind of flip through that at your leisure if you like. If you can stop, you can you know stop this video at any time, and you can look through and you can see all the different things about chapter 489. And also now chapter 2, in which chapter 489 is located, there is also something called chapter 455. So I want you to back up to page 2-26 if you're in the 2017 book, or page 2-32 if you are in the 2021 book, and you will see another chapter as well. This is another law, chapter 455. Okay, and this is the rules, the law that creates and governs the Construction Industry Licensing Board. Okay, so you might get a question about the Construction Industry Licensing Board, and this is where you might need to go. If they, the duties and powers of the board, they're going to set fees and they're going to create these examinations and that type of thing. Now, here's an important thing that I want you to know about Chapter 455 while we're talking about it. Now, this is a little bit of an issue that you need to be aware of if you're using the 2017 Contractor's Manual. Chapter 455 is a separate document. The chapter 455 in the 2017 manual is outdated. All right, it has been revised. It's actually been revised twice. Okay, so and actually, even if you have the 2021, depending on the date, there's they're getting ready. This is May of 2022 when this video is being made. They either just came out or they're just going to come out with another revision of the chapter 455. So you need to make sure you have the current chapter 455. Now you can go online. Okay, you can go online, to myflorida.com and ask for the actual current chapter 455. I would encourage you to do that. You can actually just download the PDF and print it up. Make sure it's in a binder. Okay. Now, if I had the 2021 book, I'd pretty much go with what they got in the 2021 book and not really worry about it too much. If I had the 2017 manual, I would definitely want the updated chapter 455. There's a lot of new stuff in there from since the 2017 printing. Okay. There's a lot of stuff about, we've had a lot of people go off, and fight wars and for us, God bless them, and come back to, come back home. And now they're getting back into the workforce and what have you. And they have made provisions to where they don't have to pay the fees that, that the non-combatants have had to, have to pay and what have you. So of course that's a great thing. And we need to be the other thing is we're going to be responsible for knowing that for the exam. So hopefully that made sense. And then if you just back up a little bit, from page 226 or 232, depending on where you're at, then that's where you're going to see the summary. Okay, so I'm trying one of the concepts that I want to get across to you is that this summary that many of these chapters, there's a few of these chapters, not every chapter is like this. Chapter 1's not like this, but chapter 2 is like this, and chapter 6 is like this, and chapter 9 is like this. They have the summary in the first part of the chapter, and then they have the word for word laws in the back of the chapter. Okay, so just want to make sure you're aware that that's how it is organized. Okay, so we talked about chapter 1, which is business. I'm back on the contents at a glance, by the way. I'm back on back in the table of contents. So we have business planning and organization, chapter 1. We have licensing in chapter 2. We have financial management in chapter 3. All right. We already talked about financial management. They actually have two different sections. They have a section in the financial management which says simply accounting, which is just general accounting that would apply to anybody, construction or not. And then they have a section 2, which is about specifically construction accounting. Whether or not that's going to help you find stuff, I don't really know. But, just know that there is two sections there. Yes, go ahead.
If there is a question where what I can find in both books, the BG and the Contractor manual?
Yes, there's going to be some overlapping information. There's going to be some overlapping information, but there's also going to be some different information. So you could find it in both. And sometimes it's the same concept, but they use a different word. Okay. Yeah. For instance, they talk about assets, equity, and liabilities. Okay, these are the three main things on your balance sheet. You have your assets, your liabilities, and your equity. That's what the contractor's manual calls it. Okay, the Builder's Guide to Accounting calls it assets, liabilities, and net worth. They use the term net worth, where the contractor's manual uses the term equity. So it can get, it's challenging. It's not easy. That's why you have to, have somebody help you walk through it. Yeah, exactly. If it was easy, anybody could just, take the exam and go on. It's not easy. So you are going to have to, you're going to have to understand that, it's not linear. There's going to be some nuance, as they call it. Okay, so that's chapter 3, financial management. And once again, at the back of that chapter, at the back of chapter 3, they have that thing called the circular E. That's what I was talking about, the tax tables earlier. The circular E is, and we can just go ahead and find it, 3. If you're in the 2017, it's on page 3.3-149. If you are in the 2021, it is on page 3-153. And this is your employer's tax guide. Okay, so this is the IRS publication, which tells you what taxes you're supposed to take out of your employees, what forms they're supposed to fill out, when you hire them. How much to take out for their Social Security and Medicare. Once you take the money out, what you're supposed to do with it, how you're supposed to send it to the government, how often you're supposed to send it. So there's all this information that's called the circular E. I think this was the first tab I put on my book was in 2005 when I took my first exam, was the circular E, because you definitely want to be able to find the circular E. Okay, so that's all net financial management. Remember, that's chapter 3. So that's all net financial management chapter. The chapter 4 is about risk management. Okay, risk management is what are the main terms? Well, we're talking about insurance. Okay, and we're talking about bonds. All right, so you will probably have to do a bond calculation where they're going to tell you what your contract amount is, and you're going to have to determine what the amount of the bond is. That is a very tricky calculation. All right. So don't think that you're just going to have to do a percentage. It's not. It's a step-by-step process. We're not going to go over it on this video, but there is a video that I do have that takes you through how to calculate the cost of a bond. I highly recommend that you get familiar with that. Okay. So that's all risk management. It'll talk about all the different types of insurances, what liability is, what builder's risk is, what, all your different types of insurance and your riders, that they attach to them and what have you. Okay. And then they'll talk about what they call suretyship, which is bonding. Okay. What are the different types of bonds? Well, you have a performance bond, which guarantees pretty much, which states that, the contractor is going to do what he's supposed to do. There's a payment bond where there's a bond that says the contractor is going to pay everybody. He's going to pay for his materials. He's going to pay all his subcontractors. He's going to pay all his workers, and it's not going to come back on the owner to pay this again. Okay, that's a payment bond. And then you have a bid bond. We talked about bidding earlier. Okay, if you bid the job and the owner and the architect spend a bunch of time looking through your bid, and then you say, no, I don't want the job. Well, they wasted all that time. So they might require you to submit a bid bond, which says, hey, if you submitted a bid and we accepted your bid and then you don't enter into the contract, well, guess what? Then you forfeit that bid bond. Okay, so there's a bid bond. There's two types of that. I won't go into that now, but that'll be in a future video. There's your bid bond, your payment bond, your payment bond, performance bond, and then there's some other bonds as well. So, just got to keep that. So that's all risk management. Okay. Labor laws, Chapter 5 is labor laws, labor and employment laws and regulations. As you might imagine, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of laws about how you're supposed to treat your employees. Okay. There's stuff about, there's the Civil Rights Act, the big one is the Fair Labor Standards Act. The big one is the Fair Labor Standards Act states that, they have rules about minimum wage. You got to pay minimum wage, obviously. You got to pay overtime. Okay. You got to pay time and a half or anything over 40 hours a week. Okay. And then there's certain child labor restrictions. Anybody that's under 18 years old, you can only work them so many hours. You can only work them in some professions. And they really don't want you working minors in construction. Okay. But read the rules. They're in there in Chapter 5. And once again, there's a video that's going to take you all the way through page by page, each one of these laws and what's important. The other thing towards the back of Chapter 5, there's a lot of little handouts about unemployment. All right. Unemployment benefits are a big deal on the exam. They're going to ask you a lot of questions about unemployment, what forms you have to fill out, what wages apply to unemployment. You got to know that there is a federal unemployment plan. They call it FUTA, F-U-T-A, and you have to pay the IRS, those FUTA premiums. And then you have, as in Florida, we have a state unemployment, and many states do, most states do, have a state unemployment. So there's different rules for SUTA, state unemployment, and federal unemployment, and you have to understand the difference. Okay, so FUTA, federal unemployment, SUTA, state unemployment. Okay, and then there's some pamphlets, and we'll point those out to you at a later date. Once again, this is just an overview. Okay. Chapter 6 is about workers' comp. This is one of those chapters that's organized where there's the summary in the front and then there's the word-for-word law in the back. While we're in Chapter 6, the law that governs workers' compensation is Chapter 440, they call it. Okay, Chapter 440 is about workers' compensation. Okay, so there's all these rules about construction. Okay, you have to have workers' comp. If you're in the construction industry, if you have one employee, you have to have workers' compensation. Okay, now if it's not considered construction, you don't have to have workers' comp until you have 4 employees. Okay, so there's a difference. So there's a difference. So it's important to know what the state considers construction and what they don't consider construction. And sometimes that doesn't really make a lot of sense. They got a list of stuff that says, well, this isn't construction. Sort of like well drilling on land that has a building already. They say, okay, well, that's not construction. Okay, so you don't have to follow the construction rules of workers' comp. You just have to have workers' comp if you have 4 employees, not 1 employee. All right, so there's all these rules about, and then they go on to talk about how they come up with the cost of workers' comp, and so on and so forth. All these different rules, and then things about if employee is hurt. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'm just pointing to my guy.
Oh, okay.
Talk to me.
Okay. So
put everything on the truck. Thank you.
So if anybody does get hurt, the employee has 30 days to notify you. This is the kind of stuff you have to know for the exam. Now, once you're notified, then you have to notify your insurance carrier within 7 days. These are all time frames, very typical type of a time frames that they're going to ask you about on the exam. So I encourage you to spend some time watching those videos on chapter 6. And then, so there's the summary in the beginning of the chapter, and then you're going to have the word for word law, chapter 440. And that first page, we can go ahead and see if we can find it. So we go to chapter 6, and let's see here. It's 6. I believe this is the same page on the 2017 and the 2021 is page 6-66. That's the first page of the word for word law. And the reason it's important to find this is, like I said before, there's going to be stuff in the word for word law that they don't put in the summary in the beginning of the chapter that you may have to find. And page 6-66 is the table of contents for chapter 6, for chapter 440, which is in chapter 6. That makes sense. Okay, all right. Workers' compensation, big deal out there. Probably one of the driving issues in construction today is the cost of workers' comp. Okay, chapter 7 is about safety. All right, safety is, we all know that's a big issue on the job as well. And that's going to be, once again, that's going to be chapter 7. Now, this is a business book, and it makes perfect sense to me that there's going to be a lot of paperwork and business issues with regard to OSHA. Okay. Once something happens, you're going to have paperwork to fill out. You've got records that you have to keep. You have to know how many employees that you are going to have where you have to do certain things, with regard. You're going to have to know about your penalties, okay, with regard to OSHA. So there's a lot of administrative stuff that goes along with OSHA, okay? When you report an injury, what's an injury? What's an illness? What's the difference between the two? They actually talk about that in this book. Okay, you have paperwork. You have an OSHA 300 and a 300A, and that's where you do your paperwork. And then you have a 301. And so we discuss all these things in the video about chapter 7. Okay. Now,
OSHA book separated, right?
Okay. Now we're in the Florida Contractors Manual. We're not in the OSHA manual. Okay, we're still talking about chapter 7, and we're not going to talk about the OSHA manual in this, because this is the business and finance books, and you don't bring your OSHA manual in to your business and finance exam. Okay, now the point I was trying to make was that sure, there's a lot of paperwork, there's not a business, there's a lot of administrative issues that you need to be aware of with regard to OSHA, okay? For some reason, starting on page 7-41, though, they start talking about stuff that happens on the job site, what I call nuts and bolts issues, okay? Which means, all of a sudden on 741, they're talking about trenching, okay? If you dig a trench and you got to shore it, okay? What are you going to do to keep the trench from caving in, all right? On page 7-44, they have the slopes, okay? Depending on what type of soil you have to slope that trench or that pit to keep it from caving in. Well, I don't think it belongs in this book. But you know what? They don't care what I think. They put it in here anyway. All right. And then what's really what they talk about more than that's only 3 or 4 pages of trenching and excavation. What's really important here and what's the big issue that they talk about starts on page 7-47, which is construction rigging and safety. Okay, so you will get questions about rigging, about ropes. What kind of ropes do they use? What's the best kind of rope? What's the strongest rope? What is a safe working load? How do you calculate a safe working load? When you put a rope through a pulley, what does it do to it? How much weight, what's the stress on the pulley and how much weight can you pick up and so on and so forth. All the different types of ropes. And then they talk about slings, and the angles of the slings and how you maintain a sling and how you maintain a chain. This is the kind of stuff that and it's been like this ever since the first time I picked up my first manual in 2004, took my exam, 2005 it was. And looking through all the, and I always wonder, what is this doing in this book? Well, it's in here, and you will get questions on the business and finance exam out of this back of chapter 7. So just be quiet. The good news is when you use your index, when you look up rope or rigging in the index, it'll pretty much get you to the right page. So this is the one from the 2021 that I have. And it says ropes and rigging, blocks, care and handling, change, crane hand signals, fiber ropes, and so forth, hooks, and it goes to the next page. Now, if you have the 2017, it's slightly different. They got a separate section for rigging and a separate section in the index for ropes, but it's easy to find regardless. So that's a little bit about chapter 7. Okay. Once again, we're just doing an overview of this book. Of all the business books here. And we're talking about chapter 8 now. Chapter 8 is about contracts, construction contracts. Okay. Now, we already talked about our AIA documents being contracts. Okay. And there's actually some contract information. I didn't mention this, but there are some different types of contracts that they talk about in chapter 3, that accounting financial management chapter. Chapter 8 is about contracts. It's only about contracts. Well, how do we know if we're going to go to the contractor's manual for a question versus the AIA documents for a question? Well, the thing is, chapter 8 is generalized information. What is a contract? What are the types of contracts? How long do you have to enforce a contract? What are the elements of a contract and so forth? So this is general information. The AIA documents, remember, are specific contractual requirements in that particular contract. So that's how you know which book you're going to go to for a particular contract question.
If they have a general question, I come into the contractor manual. If they have more specified, going to the A1A, right?
Yes, specificity means you go to the AIA documents. General contract information, you're going to go to the contractor's manual. There's also going to be contract information in chapter 10. So contracts are going to be, so we talked about financial management, we talked about accounting being tricky because you're going to go to 2 different books. You're going to go to Builder's Guide to Accounting. If it's not there, you go to chapter 3 in the contractor's manual. But we also talk about contracts are going to be in 3 different places as well. Chapter 8, we just saw. Okay, it's all about contracts, nothing but contracts in chapter 8. But in chapter 3, they mention them too, mention the type of contracts. And once again, when you watch that video, you'll see that. And then chapter 10, same thing. They talk about contracts again in chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called project management. So they talk about contracts. But that's okay. We're going to jump over to chapter 9. Okay. Chapter 9 is also one of these chapters where they have the summary in the beginning of the chapter. Some attorney has summarized everything he thinks you need to know, or she thinks you need to know, in the beginning of chapter 9. And then the back half of chapter 9 is the word for word law. They call it chapter 713. And that's the law that sets forth the rules about lien law. Okay, so liens. All right, so what do you have to do? There is a step step-by-step process that you have to adhere to if you want to file a valid lien. Okay, there's a document called the Notice of Commencement and all the rules about the Notice of Commencement. If you're a subcontractor or a material supplier, you have to submit what's called a notice to owner. Okay, and there's a time frame involved, 45 days from when you start work. And then there's the claim of lien itself. Okay, first of all, your notice to owner has to be served in a particular manner. Okay, so you have to know there's 4 different ways, and you have to know those. In the real world, there's just one way you're going to send a certified mail. On test day, there's 4 different ways that you can send a notice to owner. Okay, and then you've got your claim of lien, which is the next step in the process, where if you're still not getting paid after your notice to owner, you have 90 days from your last work at the site to file your claim of lien and all the things that the claim of lien has to have on it, and so on and so forth. And then how long does the claim of lien last? Well, that claim of lien lasts a year. Okay, if you don't get paid in that year, then you're going to have to file suit. Okay, in court. So there's a process involved, and you need to know all these things. And there's a video that takes you through page by page. And then once again, then at the end of the chapter, they have the word for word law. Okay, and then so that's going to take us through lien law. And then the last chapter in the book is chapter 10, and it's called project management. And it's all about. I'll just look at the table of contents of chapter 10. It's all about estimating and bidding and your plans. You have something called specifications. Okay, estimating. Estimating your equipment cost, estimating your labor cost. There is a section about contracts. There's some information about subcontractors. So that's what I was telling you before. You have your 401, which is specific information about the relationship between a contractor and a subcontractor, which is actually a contract. And then you have some general information about subcontractors in chapter 10. Okay, scheduling and planning and schedules and different people on a job, your project superintendent, your manager, who does what, who's responsible for keeping up with the schedule, and so on and so forth, their responsibilities. Now at the back of chapter 7, after all of that, they talk, I think it starts on page 10-91, did I just see? 10-91, where they talk about environmental compliance for the construction industry. Okay, how do you handle hazardous waste? How do you handle a hazardous spill? How do you handle asbestos? What do you do if you're going to be working over wetlands? Okay, all these different things about that discuss the environmental compliances at the back of chapter 10. So that does it. That takes you through. That's a good introduction to the books, the manuals that you're going to need for the business and finance exam. All right. I'll go ahead and stop that video, and we will continue on. All right.